And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I'm going to be talking about Gilbert Arenas and his comments in regards to Michael Jordan, as well as him agreeing with, sort of agreeing with Anthony Edwards' comments and how everybody is a little bit upset at Gilbert for doing so. Now, a lot of people, if you don't really follow Gilbert on his podcast, then you might not know that Gilbert isn't really a fan of a lot of players. Like, he's not really he doesn't really have many favorites. Not only does he not have many favorites around the league, but he doesn't have many favorite players around the league either. And him talking bad about the rest of the players in the 80s and 90s is not something that I really expected. Now, I would say, a lot of people that have respect for Michael Jordan, I usually expect them to have respect for a lot of the players that either came before him as well, or maybe some of the players that played alongside him as well. But it doesn't seem like a lot of the it doesn't seem like there are a lot of players that really think very highly of anyone else at that time aside from Michael Jordan. So, according to this article, Gilbert Arenas recently shared his picks for his all-time Team USA starting five, and notably, for some reason, he left out MJ. However, regarding the NBA, Arenas holds a different opinion about Michael Jordan. Recently, Anthony Edwards had claimed that MJ was the only player in his era with any sort of skill, though for the claim he received a pile of backlashes from the former players, and most notably in Magic Johnson. Arenas came forward recently in support of these claims from the Minnesota guard, and on a recent episode on Gil's Arena, which is, his podcast that he has, he shared his thoughts on the discussion, saying basically all Jordan's competition in that era did not even have the physical tools to keep with him. So he was basically a Bugatti, and that's a very funny analogy. He was basically a Bugatti and everyone else was a Honda Civic. All the shooting guards were 6'4" and under. They didn't have no jumping ability, right? Arenas said. Well, that I don't really think that's entirely true, because it's but again, the quote continues. So who he went against, he's saying they weren't talented, meaning they weren't athletic to keep up with them today, Arenas added. Well, I want to go ahead and rebuttal that let me just give me one second. I just want to make sure that I'm actually right, because there is one player that immediately comes to mind. Okay, so Gilbert Arenas, he says that there was nobody athletic back in the day. There was all the shooting guards were 6'4" and under, and they didn't have the jumping ability. Well, there was this shooting guard. He played for the Portland Trail Blazers. His name was Clyde Drexler. I don't know if you guys heard of him, but he is 6'7". He played the shooting guard, and he was an all-star in 1986. He was an all-star in 1988, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94. And a lot of people, they gave him this nickname called Clyde the Glide, right? And he was, from what I've heard, he was able to really, because, his nickname was Glide, he just, could fly. So he could fly so far, he was just a ridiculous scorer. He was 6'7", and he was a shooting guard. So what do you mean there was no shooting guard back in the day that was able to... Oh, and he was also on the NBA's top 75 team, the anniversary team that a lot of great players were on. Yeah, he was on that team. And a lot of people were saying, Gilbert is saying that there was nobody in the league that could really had the frame or the height or anything else like that to compete with him. Well, I just gave you one right there. And should also be noted that Clyde came second in MVP race. He also is on the NBA 75th team. Meanwhile, Gilbert Arenas is not. So unfortunate for that. But again, there's a player for you that could have guarded Michael Jordan. And as we saw in the postseason in 1992, Michael Jordan could not be checked, regardless of the fact that Clyde Drexler is indeed 6'7". He is also a shooting guard. He has to guard Michael Jordan. So what gives? To me, that doesn't make any sense. I don't think that's a very decent claim, and no one else really thought that was a really decent claim either. Gilbert Arenas is no longer in the NBA, yeah, but his take on current and former players often brings his name back into a lot of discussion, and not primarily for good reason. And similar to Anthony Edwards, Arenas also faced criticism from a lot of fans, and they argued that several other notable stars deserve to be included in the discussion alongside Michael Jordan, which I do agree with. I do think that there are a lot of players back in the day that deserve that same recognition for being one of the very few players that have skill. I guess you could say skill is it's a very umbrella term. Like what a lot of people consider skill, someone else might not really consider skill. Like for example, scoring a bunch of layups 24/7, a lot of people really don't consider that skill, right? Despite the numbers and despite the crazy amount of points that they're able to produce in the paint, a lot of people don't consider that skill. Like, for example, a lot of people say that Shaquille O'Neal backing down defenders isn't something that should be considered as skilled. And I might agree with that, but at the same time, I might not agree with what someone else might not consider skill. So, like, for example, Giannis Antetokounmpo, I do think he does have a pretty decent bag and a pretty decent amount of skill for a player with his height and a player with his, his frame, his strength, and just the overall advantages that he has on the court, and the way that he's able to utilize those advantages to create several disadvantages for his defender is something that's very, very skilled. But a lot of people might not really consider that skill. A lot of people might just consider that running and dunking. And see, what I said before I said running and dunking, it sounded like, the player had a lot of skill, but then I dumbed it down a little bit, and now it sounds like the player doesn't really have all that much skill, and that I might just be gassing him up. But this is exactly what they're doing to a lot of Michael Jordan and a lot of the takes that are surrounding Michael Jordan right now in the NBA. And again, a lot of people, they don't agree with this take. I'm not one of those people. Let me know in the comments what you think of this take. Do you agree with Gilbert Arenas? Do you think he is just absolutely ridiculous? Do you think that there could have been some other players back in the day that could have contained him? Do you think that there are other tall players that played the shooting guard that could have also contained him? Because that shooting guard quote really baffled me. I understand that the players might not have been as athletic, but I mean, tall was a very demanding aspect of the sport. And it's been a very demanding aspect of the sport for a very long time. So I'm very surprised at that comment. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. I'm going to go ahead and go into a break and then go into the next segment where I talk about some basketball news, some of which are regarding Russell Westbrook and the number change the crisis around his number change, as well as some other basketball news like the new docuseries that Netflix is going to produce with some of the NBA players that are going to be in it. I'm going to talk a little bit about that right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere podcasts are found.